Hello and welcome to Brodual. This time we have the combat and enemy section of our Skyrim Redone series. Unlike the other videos in the series, this particular video will focus on the 4 different enemy and combat modules that Skyrim Redone has to offer. There's the standard combat module that focuses on mechanics and formulas. Then there's the enemy scaling and enemy AI modules that aim to make enemies more unique and diverse. And then finally there's the encounter zone module that focuses on scaling of certain dungeons and other locations. First I'll start with the combat module. Skyrim Redone wants combat to consist less of spamming power attacks with an absorbed stamina enchantment, and instead focus more heavily on using new tactics and already existent game mechanics like blocking. Generally, combat will be more heavily focused around your stamina, and also to a certain extent your character's current health. Attacking and blocking now all drain stamina, and the amount of stamina drained depends on the type of weapon you're using. So for example, a heavy two-handed warhammer will drain more stamina than a light dagger, which makes sense. Successfully blocking attacks will also now drain stamina, but in return it now blocks more damage. On top of that, there's new punishments for not blocking incoming attacks, and once again it depends on the type of weapon you're hit with. Generally speaking, if you're hit directly with a melee weapon, you'll receive bleeding damage and negative armor. And once again it scales depending on the size of the weapon, so daggers will cause very little bleeding damage, whereas direct hits with a war axe could prove fatal. The amount of stamina drained when attacking or blocking is also fixed, so choosing to spend your ability pointed stamina will actually be worth it. On top of that, your default stamina regen is now increased, which has been changed for balancing purposes. You'll also want to keep your stamina and health as high as possible when fighting, and that's because you'll receive buffs depending on your current state. If your stamina is high, then you'll be able to make quick and swift blows with light weapons, as well as devastating blows with the heavier weapons. If your health remains high, then you'll also deal more damage, have more movement speed, and use less magicka to cast spells. But as your health and stamina decreases, those buffs quickly turn into negatives that hinder your ability in combat. The type of armor you wear will also have similar effects. Heavy armor provides more noticeable damage reduction, but on the side of that you also move slower. Heavy armor also protects you extremely well against arrows and bladed weapons, so you'll have to think carefully about the type of gear you wear before heading into battle. And finally, the mod also changes the stagger chances for the different weapon types. It also introduces new definite staggering attacks if you strike at the right time, like when an enemy draws their bow. And overall, all of these changes come together to create a system that isn't too far away from the vanilla game. Except now it's more focused on your character's current state and gear, as well as attacking and blocking at the right time to make use of the new stamina and staggering mechanics. The other 3 enemy modules all focus on scaling and balancing. The enemy scaling module isn't as simple as you might think. Not only does it alter the leveling of certain enemies, but it also individually adjusts their skills, resistances, health, damage and more. The main aim of the module is to increase the amount of challenging enemies during the late game of a playthrough. In the vanilla game, enemies scale so they're always slightly weaker than you, however Skyrim Redone makes it so the leveling of enemies isn't as precise or straightforward. To do that, the mod creates a random element where an enemy that would usually be leveled to 10 can now be leveled anywhere from 5 to 15. So you could get a little lucky and face a lower leveled enemy, but then the very next enemy could be of a significantly higher level. And it's that randomness that increases the diversity of what would normally be combat with the same enemies over and over again. And as I said earlier, there's been hundreds of changes to the individual stats of nearly all of the monsters and creatures in the game. So for example, spiders are now more poisonous, mechanical creatures now have noticeably more armor, and most of the rare enemies have increased stats across the board to make them even more challenging and more boss-like. The enemy AI module enhances that even further with a few minor tweaks to enemy behaviour. It's not as in-depth as some of the other combat AI mods we've covered on the channel, but it's a simpler alternative for those that don't want to use a bigger overhaul. With the module, enemies will attack more often and will capitalise on the fact that you're staggered by using a power attack while you're on the defensive. Enemies will also block more often and be even more aggressive when ganging up on someone. And finally, enemies are much more efficient in bashing and will nearly always try to bash you when you're charging up a power attack. And the last of the modules focuses on encounter zones, and it aims to make dungeons and other locations more challenging. To do this, it assigns a fixed level to certain zones across the world of Skyrim. Which means you might stumble upon a cave that's just a bit too strong for you, so you might have to come back later on. Or you could go upgrade your gear and fight through the high leveled enemies early on and receive high level loot as reward. So basically this module scales dungeons so you'll find ones of varying difficulties, and you have to decide for yourself whether you're up for the challenge. And that's everything you need to know about the combat and enemy modules of Skyrim Redone. Once again, it's important to keep in mind that you can use all of these modules separately, and you most likely substitute a different mod in the place of them if they both focus on the same thing. Combat is now more complex, challenging and fun, which is something that the vanilla game desperately needs. So if you still haven't tried out Skyrim Redone, then you can find everything you need down below. As always, be sure to leave endorsements on any mod you enjoy, and thanks for watching.